Before we jump into detail about the mechanisms of how sound is translated into neuronal activity, let's first get a sense of the overall structure of our auditory system. In order to hear, our ears must capture the mechanical energy of sound waves, efficiently transmit that energy to receptors, and those receptors must translate that energy into a code that's useful for neurons, namely into electrical signals. These three processes are carried out by three structural components of the ear: the outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. The outer ear, also called the pinna, is what we typically refer to as an ear, that floppy, sometimes funny-looking piece of skin attached to the side of your head. Across the animal kingdom, pinnae range from the minimal to the absurd. Pinnae primarily consist of cartilage tissue and skin, and their function is to collect sounds from a wide area of our environment, kind of like a reflector disc on a satellite dish. Because of the way the structure of the outer ear has evolved, we're more sensitive to sounds coming from our sides or straight ahead than we are to sounds behind us. In humans, the pinna is more or less in a fixed position. We can't wiggle our ears for any purpose other than comedic entertainment. But in many animals, the pinnae are movable under muscle control, so they can be oriented towards a source of a sound. If you've watched a cat hunting for a mouse, you can see it looking around with its ears. Our pinnae, and the pinnae of many species, have an unusual folded shape. It turns out that this isn't an accident. The shape of the outer ear helps filter sounds differently that come from different elevations, which helps us localize sounds in the up-down plane. Because we have two ears, we can rely on triangulation to help us locate sounds in the plane, but our ears are symmetric with respect to up-down variation. The asymmetric shape of our ears helps us overcome this limitation. Other species solve this problem differently. For instance, some owls have asymmetric patterns of feathers on their faces that serve a similar purpose. Once the sound waves are collected by the pinna, they move towards the middle ear through an air-filled auditory canal, which extends about 2.5 centimeters inside the skull. Sound waves that pass through the auditory canal reach the eardrum, also known as the tympanic membrane, and this causes it to move inward and outward at the same frequency as the sound wave. The mechanical vibration of the tympanic membrane is then transferred across the air-filled middle ear by a series of bones called the ossicles. Ossicles literally means little bones, which is fitting given that the ossicles are indeed the smallest bones in the human body. There are three ossicles: the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, also known as the hammer, anvil, and stirrup. The malleus is attached to the tympanic membrane, so it moves when the tympanic membrane moves. The malleus moving causes the incus to move, which in turn causes the stapes to move. The footplate of the stapes moves against a second membrane covering the oval window, which is a small hole in our skull bone. When the stapes vibrates against this membrane, it creates waves in the fluid inside the cochlea that represents the pressure fluctuations of the sound wave in air. The cochlea is a complex organ that's responsible for transforming the vibration of sound waves into neuronal signals that will eventually be perceived by the brain as sound. It's a coiled-up structure that contains a membrane called the basilar membrane that in turn vibrates in response to sound. Attached to this membrane are sensory neurons called hair cells that transduce mechanical movements into electrical signals. We'll talk more about the function of the cochlea in a minute, but first let's pause for a moment to recap what we've just learned about the steps leading up to the inner ear. First, incoming sound-induced pressure waves generate vibrations in the tympanic membrane. The vibrations of the tympanic membrane move the ossicles. The mechanical movement of the ossicles moves the membrane of the oval window. The movement of the oval window in turn moves the fluid in the cochlea. And lastly, the movement of the cochlear fluid initiates a response in sensory neurons. Does this seem a bit convoluted? Well, it certainly is a complex system, but nature rarely wastes resources, and there are good reasons why nature uses such a complicated system with so many parts. You might be wondering why we don't simply have the sound waves hit the sensory neurons directly. Well, those sensory neurons are surrounded by fluid, which is more dense than the air that the sound waves are initially propagating through. Because of the physics of wave propagation, waves that attempt to cross into a more dense medium tend to be reflected back. So if the sound waves were to directly hit the fluid-filled sensory parts of the cochlea, most of the wave energy would be reflected and not reach our brain. The middle ear is what allows us to avoid reflecting back all of the sound waves that come our way. It evolved the ability to make up for the reduction in vibration that happens when waves cross an air-fluid interface from the environment to our inner ear. But how exactly does the middle ear do this? Ossicles of the middle ear are structured in such a way that they can take a given amount of incoming pressure and increase the pressure output by a factor of about 30. This means that whatever pressure vibrations would have been lost to reflection at the air-fluid interface are recovered by the hydraulic press-like mechanism of the ossicles. This process is called impedance matching. It not only recovers the pressure intensity that's lost due to reflection, but it can also amplify otherwise soft sounds. Since the eardrum picks up weak vibrations across a large area of our surroundings, the ossicles act to concentrate these weak vibrations over the smaller area of the oval window. The overall result of impedance matching is to maximize the intensity of the wave as it's transferred from one membrane to another. In addition to evolving a way to turn up the volume of the sounds we hear, the complexity of this auditory pathway also allows us to protect the inner ear from sounds that are too loud. This process is called gating. Muscles in the middle ear can reduce the transmission efficiency of the ossicles, so the vibrations that pass through to the inner ear are actually smaller than they were in the auditory canal. They do this by contracting and physically suppressing the vibration of the ossicles. These muscles are activated in two ways. The first is pre-programmed. For instance, before you speak, the muscles contract so that the sound of your own voice doesn't drown out the sounds around you. The second mechanism is reflexive. In response to a loud noise, either sudden or continuous, the muscles contract to reduce ossicle vibration. Gating is a very important function carried out by the middle ear. Without being able to tune down the power transfer from the tympanic membrane to the oval window, we'd have no way of protecting the inner ear from noise-induced damage.